My son looked me dead in the eyes and screamed, "Pay rent or get out of my house." What he didn't know was the house was in my name. A week later I sold it. Now he pays rent to strangers. If you think this is just another family drama, you're wrong. Subscribe now so you won't miss the next jaw-dropping stories we bring to life. Brooklyn breathed in gray that morning. Not the soft, wistful kind of gray, but the kind that settles like a film over everything. It touches heavy clouds, sagged low, smothering the streets in mist. Rain tapped gently against the cracked windows of the narrow brownstone on 9th Street, a weary little house that slumped between its younger, freshly painted neighbors like an old woman in church wearing a dress 20 years out of date. Inside, the air was still. You could hear the whisper of fabric and the tick of a second-hand clock on the wall. Martha Green sat in the corner of her kitchen near the window, hunched over an antique Singer sewing machine. Her hands moved slowly, methodically, stitching the hem of a faded dress. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Her fingers, knotted with arthritis, shook ever so slightly, but they still remembered the rhythm. She didn't hum. Martha didn't hum anymore. The walls around her were yellowed, the wallpaper peeling in slow, lazy curls like aging skin. A leak in the ceiling above the sink had stained the plaster the color of weak coffee. The kitchen light above her flickered occasionally, as if deciding whether to die or not. Then came the knock. 3 light raps followed by a 4th, more decisive one. Martha looked up, heart, doing that small, startled flutter it always did when someone came unannounced. She stood slowly, wiped her hands on the apron tied at her waist, and shuffled to the door. She didn't need to look through the peephole. She already knew. Jacob stood there in a tailored coat, hair slicked back, holding a reusable coffee cup from somewhere expensive. Rachel, his wife, stood a half-step behind him in boots that weren't meant for wet sidewalks, holding a large envelope under her arm like it might contain the future. "Hi, Ma," Jacob said, that polite, bright tone that didn't reach his eyes. "We figured we'd stop by." Martha opened the door wider. "I figured you would." Rachel kissed the air beside her cheek and stepped in like she owned the floor. "Gloomy out today, huh? This old place always feels colder in the rain." Martha said nothing. She walked back to the sewing machine. The dress wasn't going to finish itself. Jacob followed her inside, eyeing the faded curtains and the worn linoleum. "You've still got that old thing running?" He nodded at the Singer. "Damn. I don't know how you manage without throwing your back out." "It's muscle memory," Martha said. Rachel sat down at the kitchen table, her legs crossed tight. "Ma, we've been thinking." Again. Here it comes, Martha thought. She pressed her foot lightly on the pedal, letting the machine purr. Jacob leaned on the counter. "We're worried about you living here alone. It's not safe, you know that. These stairs, the wiring, and God knows what's in the basement." Martha didn't answer. Rachel took the baton. "And it's not just the safety, Ma. It's about quality of life. You need people around, a community. Assisted living could be a real change for you. They do activities, bingo, gardening, tai chi." "I don't garden," Martha replied without looking up. "But you used to love plants," Rachel chirped, almost desperate. "Back in Ridgewood, remember?" Martha lifted the presser foot, turned the fabric. The motor hummed. Jacob exhaled sharply. "We're not saying you have to go tomorrow, but there's this place in Clinton Hill, great reputation, full medical staff, even memory care if you ever needed it. We've already taken a tour." Rachel opened the envelope and slid a glossy brochure onto the table. On the cover, a smiling woman in a wheelchair being pushed by a young man in scrubs. Martha looked at it. Then she looked out the window. "I'm not going to any home," she said quietly. Jacob's jaw tightened. "Ma, be reasonable. You're 76. You don't even have a functioning boiler. You've had 2 falls this year. I tripped on your wife's luggage the last time she visited," Martha said, finally turning her eyes on him. Rachel gave a tight smile. "Let's not be petty." "I'm not," Martha replied, her voice even. "I'm remembering." Jacob tried another angle. "We're just looking out for you. And frankly, this house, it's got a lot of potential. You're sitting on a serious asset here. If we sell—" "There it is," Martha interrupted. Jacob blinked. "What?" "The real reason you're here," Rachel scoffed. "That's not fair." "No," Martha said. "But it's true. Silence fell in the kitchen. Only the rain outside dared to keep talking. Jacob rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma, this isn't about money. It's about your future." Martha stood, slowly, steadying herself on the chair. "My future is here," she said. "In these walls, in that basement, in this house your father bled his hands to hold on to. My future is ghosts and stitches and the sound of this machine. You want me to trade that for bingo night and bland soup?" Rachel sighed loud. "You always make things so emotional." "That's because they are." Jacob checked his watch. "We'll give you a few days to think, but we'll have to move forward, Ma. This place is falling apart. You don't want something happening to you and no one around to help." They left shortly after, no hugs. The envelope remained on the table like a scar. Martha watched them walk down the steps, shielding themselves from the rain with an umbrella that wasn't hers. Their footsteps disappeared into the static of the storm. The house fell quiet again, so quiet it ached. The rest of the day passed like molasses in winter. Martha didn't eat dinner. She sat in the living room staring at the fireplace that no longer worked, holding a photograph of her and her late husband on Coney Island, both laughing, covered in sand. She didn't recognize her own face in it anymore. She looked young, fragile, free. The wind howled outside, then crack. A violent shudder ran through the floorboards. Martha sat up alert. A second sound pop, followed by a low gurgling from somewhere deep below. She grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and made her way to the basement door. It creaked when she opened it the same way it always had. The staircase stretched down into darkness, a narrow tunnel of warped wood and shadows. She took the first step. The smell hit her instantly, mildew rust, and something older, deeper, like forgotten paper and grief. Water dripped steadily from a broken pipe, pooling at the base of the stairs. A slow leak. A warning. The basement was a museum of neglect. Rusted filing cabinets, moth-eaten coats, boxes with labels written in a hand that wasn't hers. Time was thick down there like fog. She moved carefully, holding the flashlight steady. The beam landed on old holiday decorations, a broken baby carriage, piles of cloth from her old shop. The air felt heavier with each breath. That's when she saw it. Wedged behind a stack of boxes, half covered in a mildewed tarp, a wooden box, unmarked, dust-covered, lock-long rusted. Something pulled at her gut. A memory. A warning. She crouched slowly, the flashlight beam shaking in her grip. Her fingers brushed the lid. It was warm. No reason it should be. She lifted it. Not heavy, but dense, like it carried more than it should. She set it on the workbench, wiped it clean with the sleeve of her cardigan. The wood was oak, old, handmade, the kind of thing crafted with care, not bought in a store. The clasp gave with a soft snap. She opened it. Inside a photograph, her wedding photo. Clean, preserved. She was 22. Her husband Michael wore his army uniform. He was smiling in that half-shy, half-proud way he always had. She looked like hope. Beneath it, a folded letter browned with age. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting wasn't Michael's. Walter Greaves. The name hit her like a snowstorm. Michael's best friend. The man who served beside him in the war. The one who never came home. The letter was dated 1953. The ink was careful, formal. It spoke of sacrifice, of a promise made between soldiers of a house bought not as charity, but as legacy. Martha, if you are reading this, it means I didn't come back. I told Michael that if anything happened to me, he should use the money I left behind for something that lasts. This house is my gift to your future, not because you are a widow, but because you are the kind of woman who builds homes, not just lives in them. Walter. Martha dropped to the stool behind her. The room seemed to spin. The rain above grew harder, but she barely heard it. Her fingers traced the edge of the photo again, then the letter, then the inside of the box. Beneath the letter, folded neatly, was a thin packet of papers, a deed, with her name on it, co-signed, stamped, official. She closed the lid softly. Then she sat in the dark, listening to the pipe drip the storm roar, and her heart began to stir from something deeper than sadness. It was the beginning of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Fire. The rain didn't let up. It came down like memory, heavy, relentless, and unforgiving. Martha stood at the top of the basement stairs, her hand still gripping the wooden railing. The light above flickered again, casting shadows that danced on the narrow walls. She could smell it now, wet wood mold and something older, something like forgotten stories sealed in damp air. She tightened the cardigan around her shoulders and started down. Slowly. One hand on the banister, the other holding a flashlight that stuttered with every shake of her fingers. The basement groaned like it had a voice of its own. Each step down felt like crossing into a world the rest of the house had abandoned years ago. Cobwebs clung to the corners. The cold concrete floor gleamed faintly with moisture. Boxes were stacked like crooked tombstones, their labels long smudged or faded. She hadn't been down here since Michael died. The old washer sat silent, its enamel chipped, a towel still draped over it, as if waiting for laundry that would never come. Nearby, a cracked mirror leaned against the wall. Her reflection in it was ghostly soft silver and smaller than she remembered. She walked farther in. The water from the burst pipe had seeped into the far end, darkening the floorboards and warping a few cardboard boxes. She nudged one with her foot. Its side collapsed, spilling yellowed fabric onto the ground, old uniforms maybe, or curtains from another decade. She didn't know what compelled her. A pull maybe, or instinct. But her eyes caught something in the far corner tucked behind a collapsed shelf and a rusted bicycle that hadn't moved since Jacob was in grade school. It was small, wooden, simple, a box. She took a step closer. The air around it felt heavier, like it didn't belong in this time or even in this world. Martha crouched slowly, knees popping in protest. Her flashlight beam passed over the box's surface oak, worn to a dull patina with a faded brass clasp rusted at the edges. Dust clung to it in thick layers, and cobwebs veiled its corners like curtains over a casket. She reached out and touched it. The box was cold, but not in the way damp things are cold. It was still, like it had been waiting, like it had its own pulse, one she could almost hear when she closed her eyes. She pulled it toward her. A sharp creak echoed through the basement. She glanced up, but the silence returned, thick and humming. Just her and the storm above thumping like a heartbeat. The clasp gave with a gentle snap. She opened the lid. The scent hit her first. Cedar, paper, distant perfume. It smelled like the past. At the very top lay a photograph. She brought the flashlight close. The beam caught the edges of a wedding picture perfectly preserved despite the years. She was so young in it, 22 maybe. Eyes wide, lips parted in a half laugh. And Michael. God, Michael. In uniform, freshly pressed with that same boyish grin that never seemed to fade even through the war. She didn't know the picture existed. Or maybe she had forgotten. But seeing it now, the weight of it, the precision of their smiles, it undid something inside her. She placed the photograph gently on her lap. Beneath it, a folded piece of paper sealed with a brittle piece of twine. She untied it slowly, hands shaking more from memory than age. The handwriting was careful, masculine, familiar. Walter Greaves. Her breath caught. That name hadn't left her lips in over 50 years. Michael's best friend. His shadow in the trenches. The one who wrote letters when Michael couldn't. The one who never came home. The letter was dated July 18th, 1953. It was addressed to her, Martha. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I told Mike once if I didn't get out, he had to take care of you. We made a pact not just about survival, but about legacy. You were the only one who ever reminded us why we wanted to come home in the first place. This house, it's not just wood and nails. It's what we dreamed of in foxholes. It's where peace lives. The deed should be in your name along with the signed agreement. I had no family to leave it to. You were my family, my choice. Don't let it become something else. Don't forget why it matters. Walter. Martha didn't notice her tears until they landed on the letter. She couldn't breathe. Or maybe she could, but the air was too thick with ghosts. She set the letter down beside her and reached deeper into the box. There it was, a bound leather journal. Michael's handwriting scrawled across the inside cover, pages filled with his thoughts from the war, his plans for after, the names of their unborn children, the way he described her laugh, the fear he wrote through clenched teeth. The night he almost didn't make it, and Walter carried him 2 miles under enemy fire. Stories she had never heard, memories she didn't know were hers, and at the bottom of the box, thin parchment folded into a rectangle sealed with a faded ribbon. The deed, her name, clear, underlined, with Walter's and Michael's signatures beside it. It was real, all of it. She sat back on her heels, staring at the items spread across the workbench. The storm outside had quieted, reduced to soft weeping against the windows, and suddenly she wasn't alone. She was 22 again, barefoot in the kitchen, Michael's arms around her waist as he dipped her backward in a messy waltz. He was laughing, hair still damp from the shower music playing from the little radio by the sink. Then the image shifted Michael in uniform, standing in the doorway, bag in hand, trying to smile through a goodbye neither of them believed would be the last. And Walter, she remembered now, the last time she saw him, the way he looked at her when he handed over a folded American flag, his eyes like glass, his hands trembling. He never told her what he had done, never said a word about the house. She felt the cold concrete press against her legs as she sank lower now, sitting completely on the basement floor, back against the damp wall. The photograph rested in her lap, the letter beside her, the box open, its secret spilled and alive. Tears slid down her cheeks in silence, not violent, not sharp, but slow, like something releasing itself. She wasn't crying for the past. She was crying for everything that had been buried beneath it. Martha looked around at the shadows in the basement, the cracked walls, the leaking pipe, the boxes sagging under the weight of years, and realized this wasn't just storage. It was a crypt, a capsule of time, a space that had held her grief when she couldn't, and now it had returned something to her, a truth, a purpose. She traced the edge of the letter with her fingertips. Walter's words burned into her like embers that refused to die. Don't forget why it matters. She leaned her head back against the wall, closed her eyes, and took the deepest breath she'd taken in years. It didn't smell like decay anymore. It smelled like legacy. She sat there for what felt like hours, the box open beside her, like a time machine with no dial, only memory. Outside, the rain softened into mist. Inside, Martha Green sat in her basement with ghosts that no longer haunted her but bore witness beside her. The sky had cleared by morning, but the air still held a weight like the city had been crying in its sleep and hadn't fully recovered. Inside the house it smelled of damp wood and yesterday's truth. Martha had barely slept. She spent most of the night sitting at the kitchen table, the wooden box resting in front of her like a sacred relic. The photograph, the deed, Walter's letter, all still neatly arranged inside. She hadn't moved them. Couldn't. She sipped lukewarm tea as sunlight crept through the stained glass of the front window, painting faded colors on the walls. Her hands trembled less now, but her heart felt different. It wasn't racing, just awake, for the first time in a long while. At exactly 9:04 a.m., the front door burst open. "Jacob, Mom." His voice echoed down the hallway before he appeared in the kitchen. "What the hell happened in the basement?" Martha didn't answer. She just looked at him, tall, tense, holding his phone in one hand and frustration in the other. "I went down to check the pipe and it's like a goddamn bomb went off. Boxes everywhere, moldy fabrics. You could get sick from breathing that crap in." She set her teacup down carefully. "I was cleaning," she said. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. "Cleaning you? When was the last time you even went down there?" "Last night." He blinked. "What for?" She paused, then gently reached to the box on the table and opened it. "This," she said. Jacob stepped closer, eyebrows raised. He peered inside. "A photo album?" he asked, reaching for the picture. She stopped him with a hand. "Not just that." "Okay," he said, drawing out the word. "What is it then?" "It's our history," she replied softly. He gave a tight, skeptical laugh. "Jesus, Mom. What, you found some old scrapbook and now you're having an epiphany?" She didn't answer. He leaned in again this time, noticing the folded letter, the seal, the journal. He picked up the deed and scanned it quickly. "Wait, what is this?" "The deed to the house," she said. "Walter Greaves left it to me. Officially. It's all here. Signed. Witnessed. It was Michael's promise to him. A gift. Not just a place to live, but a symbol." Jacob squinted at the signature. "Walter. As in Dad's war buddy, I thought he died overseas." He did, Martha whispered, but not before making sure we'd have something to come home to. Jacob dropped the deed back in the box and straightened up. Okay, you're gonna hate me for saying this, but this is junk, Mom. I mean, it's sentimental, sure. Touching even. But we're talking about pieces of paper from a century ago. She stiffened. You don't think it means anything? To you, maybe. But to anyone else, it's a shoebox of dinosaur bones. She flinched just slightly. Jacob continued, oblivious. You really want to throw away your comfort, safety, a decent retirement over a bunch of yellowing pages and some woo-to bromance. She closed the lid of the box slowly. You don't see it. No, I see it clearly. You're clinging to ghosts. This house, this box, it's a mausoleum, Mom, and I'm trying to help you let it go before it buries you. Silence stretched between them. Martha stood, picked up the box with both hands, held it to her chest like armor. You know what I think, Jacob, she said softly, firmly. I think you're scared of what this house remembers. You want to sell it before the walls start talking. His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? But she was already walking past him through the front door, down the cracked steps, and into the sunlit street. She didn't slam the door. That would have given him too much satisfaction. The sidewalk was wet underfoot, the puddles mirroring fragments of buildings and telephone wires overhead. Martha walked slowly, box in hand, breath steady. She didn't have a plan. She just knew she needed to tell someone who would listen. 3 blocks down, she spotted the green awning of Brooklyn City Channel 12, a small local news station tucked between a flower shop and a tax office. It wasn't the New York Times, but it was something. The front office was empty when she stepped in, bell chiming softly above her. The air smelled like ink, coffee, and dust. A young woman at the reception desk looked up. Hi, Martha said. I'd like to speak to someone about a story. I think it matters. The receptionist looked surprised. Any particular department? History. Or memory, Martha said deadpan. The girl chuckled nervously and picked up the phone. A minute later, a voice called from the hallway. Elena. Footsteps approached. A young woman, early 30s maybe, stepped into the lobby. She wore jeans, a flannel shirt, and a lanyard that read Producer Doc's Community Stories. She had a camera bag slung across her shoulder and coffee in one hand. I'm Elena, she said. You've got a story? Martha nodded. I think so. Great. Come with me. Elena's office was small, filled with cables, hard drives, a bulletin board of photos and deadlines. She cleared a chair and motioned for Martha to sit. So she said, pulling out a notepad. What's the story? Martha placed the wooden box on the desk. This house, she began, was given to me by a soldier named Walter Greaves. He served with my husband. He died in the war. Left us this place as a gift, as a promise. Elena leaned in, eyes narrowing with curiosity. Wait, you mean like legally? Martha opened the box, showed her the documents, the photo, the letter. Elena's breath caught. This is real, she whispered. This is something. I thought maybe, Martha said, her voice cracking a little, someone should know before it disappears into someone's portfolio. Elena touched the photo gently, reverently. Can I film you? She asked. Just a short piece, doesn't have to air. I think people should hear this from you. Martha hesitated. She had never been on camera. She had never really been seen. Not since Michael died. Not since Jacob became the center of every family conversation. Not since she stopped being a person and became an obstacle. But Elena was looking at her, not through her, not around her. Yes, Martha said finally, you can. Elena smiled. Let me grab my camera. The room they used was a small interview setup in the back of the station, black backdrop, 2 chairs, 1 soft light. Intimate. Still. Martha sat in front of the camera, the wooden box placed gently in her lap. Elena adjusted the mic. You ready? Martha nodded. Slate, the assistant, called. Test interview. Martha Green. Box sequence. Camera rolled. Elena sat across from her, voice gentle. Martha. Can you tell us what you found in your basement? Martha looked at the lens for a moment, then past it. I found memory, she said, and proof of love, of sacrifice, of promises kept even after death. Elena didn't interrupt. She let the silence breathe. My husband served in Korea, Martha continued. He didn't talk about it much, said the past belonged to the ground, but he always spoke about Walter, his friend, his shadow, the man who saved his life. She looked down at the box. When Michael passed, I thought all his stories died with him. But last night, This box reminded me that some stories wait. They wait for the right moment, for someone to listen. Tears welled in Elena's eyes behind the camera. She didn't blink them away. Martha reached into the box and held up the photo. "This is the last time I remember being young," she said. "This is what we fought for. This house, this life, this promise." Silence. And then, cut. Back in the lobby, as Martha prepared to leave, Elena walked beside her. "I can't promise anything," she said, "but I want to show this to my producer. If she agrees, we'll run it next week, our Hidden Stories segment." "I'm not looking for attention," Martha said. "I know," Elena smiled. "That's why it matters." As she stepped back into the street, the sun broke through the clouds above Brooklyn, and for the first time in a long while, Martha didn't feel small. She felt real. The clip was only 3 minutes long. 3 minutes of grainy studio lighting, a woman in a faded cardigan, and a box resting on her lap like a fragile treasure. The footage wasn't flashy. No dramatic music, no fancy edits. Just a voice, quiet, steady, and aching with decades of silence finally unraveling. It aired on Channel 12's Hidden Stories segment on a Tuesday night at 6:37 p.m. By 7:03 it was on YouTube. By 8:12 it had 32,000 views. And by morning the internet had found Martha Green. A soft knock echoed on the front door just after sunrise. Not the aggressive rap Jacob always used, but a gentle, uncertain tapping like someone unsure if they were welcome. Martha stood in the kitchen cradling her cup of tea. She hadn't expected anyone. She hadn't expected anything really, not after simply telling the truth. She opened the door. A woman stood there holding a pie. She looked to be in her 40s, hair pinned up, eyes kind and bright. "Miss Green," she asked. "I'm Tanya. I live 3 houses down. I saw your story last night. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing it." Martha blinked. "You saw it?" The woman nodded. "It was beautiful. I had no idea about your husband or the house. My son's in the army. I watched your clip 3 times. It reminded me why we choose to serve, why we come back." She held out the pie. "Peach," she said, still warm. Martha took it with both hands. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, something gentle passing between them. Then Tanya said, "You're not invisible, Miss Green, not anymore." By noon, 3 more neighbors had stopped by. One brought flowers from their garden. Another left a card in the mailbox that simply read, "You are a monument." The last was a teenager from down the street who knocked shyly, mumbled something about "my history teacher made us watch your video," and handed her a drawing of the house in watercolor. Martha placed it on the fridge. She sat on the living room couch that afternoon, the wooden box beside her, as the light shifted through the windows. She didn't speak much. She just received. For once it was her turn to absorb, not give. To feel the world reaching toward her rather than pulling something from her. Around 3 p.m. the doorbell rang again. This time it was a man in a navy blue peacoat with a messenger bag slung over one shoulder. He had graying temples, wire-framed glasses, and the posture of someone who lived inside libraries. "Ms. Green?" he asked. "Yes, my name's Professor Gerald Collins. I'm a historical archivist with the Brooklyn Preservation Society. I saw your interview and I'd love to speak with you. Do you have a moment?" Martha hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. He entered cautiously, like he was afraid to breathe too loudly in the presence of something sacred. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the wooden box. She placed it on the table and opened the lid. He leaned over it reverently, carefully lifting the letter from Walter, the photograph, and finally the deed. "My God," he whispered, "this is extraordinary." He looked up at her. "This house," he said, voice thick with wonder. "This is a military legacy home. It's one of the very few properties in Brooklyn officially recorded in post-war veteran gift exchanges. I've seen files on these, but never the actual documentation. Never with the original owners still living in them." Martha sat slowly across from him, listening but not quite processing. "Do you mind if I take photographs?" he asked. "For initial cataloging purposes. I'll email you a full copy." She nodded. "What does this mean?" He leaned forward, eyes sharp now, excited. "It means your home isn't just a home, it's a site of cultural heritage. Living history. We have protocols for places like this, protections, funding, recognition. With your permission, I'd like to initiate a preservation review. If approved, the house could be declared a protected landmark. Martha swallowed. And what happens then? No one can sell it. No one can demolish it. It becomes something bigger than a piece of real estate. It becomes story, memory, protected by law. Her hands curled around the edge of her chair. Jacob won't like that, she said quietly. Professor Collins tilted his head. I suspect he's already had his turn deciding what matters. Maybe now it's yours. That night after the professor left, Martha stood in the hallway just outside her bedroom. She looked at the walls. She'd passed them 1,000 times, dusted them, repainted them, cursed them when they creaked. But tonight she really saw them. The cracks near the ceiling, the patch of wallpaper near the doorframe with a child's scribble still faintly visible beneath the paint. Jacob's name, from when he was 5, in green crayon. She touched it. So much had happened here. First steps, first arguments, late-night returns, creaking stairs and quiet laughter. This house had not just housed her life, it had recorded it, stored it in its bones. Now others were listening. Now finally someone saw. The next day she received an email from the Brooklyn Heritage and Preservation Commission. Elena had forwarded the story. So had Professor Collins. Attached were digital copies of the broadcast early scans of the deed and an official inquiry form requesting permission to begin an external survey. Martha read the letter 3 times. The words were clear. We believe your home may qualify as a protected site under the Veterans Legacy Initiative. Your voice matters. Your presence matters. You are history. She sat back in her chair, the cursor blinking in the reply box. She thought about the years she'd spent feeling small, quiet, out of step with the world. How quickly one box, one letter had changed the way people looked at her. Or maybe it hadn't changed anything. Maybe it had just reminded them she existed. She clicked reply. By late afternoon, 2 representatives from the commission arrived. They brought clipboards, cameras, soft voices, and warm smiles. One of them, Darla, wore bright red lipstick and scuffed boots. She kept touching the walls like she could hear them speak. They walked. The perimeter, took measurements, snapped photos. Inside they noted original fixtures, window panes, a doorknob with a carved W that had somehow survived generations. It's like this house knew it had to be remembered, Darla whispered. As they wrapped up the other rep, a younger man named Matteo turned to Martha. There's something about this place, he said. Not just the documents, the energy, the layers. It's rare. You don't see this kind of authenticity anymore. Martha offered him a tired smile. I don't think I've ever been called authentic before. You should get used to it. That evening, after the last of the surveys, Martha stood alone in the living room. The lights were dim, the air still. She looked around not at what needed fixing, but at what had endured. The fraying curtains, the worn sofa, the painting of Michael from their 20th anniversary still slightly crooked on the wall. Everything that had once embarrassed her now felt like armor. Even the silence, especially the silence, felt earned. Her eyes moved toward a crack along the north wall. She had always hated that crack. It zigzagged like a scar, ugly and persistent, just above the mantel. Michael had promised to patch it years ago, but then life happened. Time moved. They forgot. Now she saw it differently. It was a line in a story, a wrinkle in something beautiful. She approached it, pressed her hand to the wall, and stood there breathing in the scent of old plaster and lavender floor cleaner. For the first time, Martha Green didn't feel like a burden in her own home. She felt like a chapter. She felt like evidence. Outside, people passed by on the sidewalk. Some slowed to glance at the house. Others paused, pointed. A few even took photos. Something was shifting. She watched them through the curtain for a long time. Then she whispered, not to them, but to the house itself. They see us now. The call came just after Martha finished her second cup of morning tea. She was sitting in the kitchen, flipping through the yellowed pages of Michael's journal. The scent of aged paper and faint tobacco mixing with the lemon cleaner she'd used on the countertops earlier. Outside, birds chirped like nothing had changed, but inside her chest, something trembled. Her cell phone, an old, stubborn flip model, buzzed on the table. She glanced at the caller ID. Jacob. She answered with a quiet hello. His voice shot through the speaker like ice. Mom, what the hell is going on? She sat straighter. "Good morning, Jacob." "Don't do that," he snapped. "I just got a call from a real estate contact who said your address is now flagged on the Brooklyn Landmark watch list. Is that true?" Martha didn't respond right away. "You filed some kind of claim without talking to me." "I didn't file anything," she said calmly. "A historian saw the deed. A preservation society followed up. I told the truth. That's all." Jacob laughed bitterly. "The truth? You gave an interview on local TV. You're in viral videos. You turned our house into a circus attraction, and you think I wouldn't find out?" "Our house," she asked quietly. "Or your investment?" Silence crackled through the line. Then his voice returned lower, more venomous. "You don't get to make these decisions alone. Not anymore. You're not mentally equipped. You're being manipulated by these people who don't even know you." "I know myself," she said. "Yeah," he scoffed. "You're 80 years old, sitting on a crumbling roof and a pipe bomb of a basement clinging to letters from the 1950s like they're the Constitution. You want to become a local legend, fine, but I'm not going to let you blow up the future for both of us." Martha's jaw tightened. Her free hand curled slowly into a fist on the table. "I'm hiring a lawyer," Jacob finished. "He'll be coming by today." Then the line went dead. She sat still for a long while. The journal lay open in front of her, words from a younger time inked in slanted loops. "Home is where memory decides to live, not where money decides to move." She stood slowly, but not shakily. The knock on the door came just before noon. It wasn't Jacob. It was a tall man in a dark blue blazer, sharp-eyed and well-groomed. He introduced himself as Richard Bloom, real estate attorney, speaking on behalf of Jacob Green. He pulled out a folder as he stepped into the house uninvited. "I'm here to advise you on the legal risks of any property designation process you may be considering," he began. "Under New York State family asset law, shared interest may be implied, particularly if your son has financially contributed to the maintenance of this home or has established expectation of inheritance." Martha didn't offer him a seat. Instead, she leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "You can tell Jacob," she said evenly, "that this house was a gift. Not a deal, not a retirement plan, and not a battlefield for his ambition." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I'd like to avoid litigation." "So would I." He sighed, softened his tone. "There are ways to work this out amicably. Perhaps a partial sale preserving key structures, but liquidating land value. I have architects and developers who specialize in maintaining character while—" Martha raised a hand. "No." He blinked. She stepped closer. "You think I'm an old woman with sentimentality. But what I am is a widow who buried her husband's memory in these walls. What I am is the final witness to a man who died so we could live. I will not convert that sacrifice into square footage." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but the weight of her words stole the room's air. She turned and pointed to the door. "Get out." He left without another word. That evening, Elena arrived. She brought takeout vegetarian curry and sticky rice and 2 ginger ales. "I saw the news," she said as they ate on the front porch. "Someone from a developer's office called the station, asked if we had your signed release, tried to get your interview pulled." Martha nodded. "They'll keep trying." Elena looked at her carefully. "Are you okay?" Martha didn't answer right away. She gazed out at the setting sun spilling gold across the tops of brownstone roofs. "I used to be afraid of conflict," she said softly. "It always ended with silence, or bruises, or both. But now, there's nothing left to protect but the truth." Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a small recorder. "I have a proposition," she said. "What if we told more of the story, not just the soldier and the house, but you? The seamstress, the widow, the silence, the cost." Martha frowned. "Why would anyone care?" "Because no one ever hears it, and they should." Martha ran her fingers along the armrest of the wooden chair. The grain felt like skin, rough but honest. "I don't know how to tell it. We can help. I've got a team. We can film it right here. Just you, your space. We won't twist it, won't edit it into sound bites. We'll let you breathe." The sky deepened to violet. Martha took a sip of ginger ale. "Okay," she said. That night she went to the hall closet. The top shelf was stacked with linens and forgotten boxes, but she knew what she was looking for. It was wrapped in tissue folded inside a canvas garment bag with a broken zipper. She took it down gently, arms aching from the weight not of fabric but memory. Her wedding dress, simple, ivory, hand-stitched, lace trim that had yellowed with time, a pearl button missing at the collar. She laid it across the bed like a body. Then she ran her fingers down the seams. Some had frayed, a tear along the hem, a few old wine stains near the base. She brought out her sewing kit, the same one she'd used in her shop for over 3 decades. A soft lamp lit the room. She threaded a needle, pulled the silk taut, and began to stitch. It was quiet work, meditative. Each pull of thread was like a breath, each knot a choice to restore rather than replace. She didn't listen to music. She didn't want distraction. She wanted the silence. She wanted the presence. As she worked, she remembered the day she wore it, June 12, 1954. Michael had barely returned from overseas. He wore his uniform to the altar, couldn't afford a tux. They got married in the back garden of her aunt's house, surrounded by hydrangeas and cicadas. She remembered his hands on her waist, the way he whispered, "You're my home now," and how afterward she kept the dress in its bag, promising herself she'd wear it again on an anniversary maybe, or to pass it down. But life had no use for gowns, only survival. Now each thread she pulled was for the girl who dreamed, for the woman who endured, for the widow who remembered. By midnight, the hem was repaired. The stains hadn't lifted, but she didn't mind. Some marks weren't meant to be erased. She hung the dress near the window and let it catch the breeze. It fluttered slightly, as if remembering how it once danced. The next morning she received a voicemail from Jacob. His voice was cold, calculated. "I've spoken to another attorney. If you proceed with this landmark nonsense, we will pursue elder influence claims. I'm not letting you sabotage what's rightfully mine." She deleted the message without listening to the end. Then she opened the window wide, let the sun pour in, and went back to stitching the neckline. Her fingers were sore, but they remembered. They always had. The official segment aired on a Thursday evening. Channel 12 led with it, not because it was news in the conventional sense, but because something about the footage refused to be quiet. The senior producer had watched Martha's full interview twice, and then said to Elena, "Put it front and center. Let the silence speak." The segment opened with a close-up of Martha's hands resting gently on her wedding dress, the box beside her, the war letter folded in the frame like a forgotten prayer. Her voice filled the screen, not trembling, not theatrical, but certain. She spoke of promises made between soldiers of houses that carried grief and legacy, of how time doesn't erase meaning, it hides it in dust. By the time the credits rolled, Twitter was on fire. Witness not burden. Martha Green. This house remembers. On TikTok, teenagers stitched clips of her story over images of their grandparents. On Instagram, the house's crooked facade was filtered into beauty. And on YouTube, the full 14-minute documentary segment had amassed over 500,000 views in 2 days. People weren't just moved, they were angry that no one had asked her sooner. In a gleaming midtown office surrounded by glass, Jacob Green stared at his phone in disbelief. His company's name, Urban Point Capital, was trending, not for real estate deals, but because his mother's story had hit the internet like wildfire, and someone had connected the dots. A journalist posted screenshots of public records linking Urban Point's acquisition interest to Martha's house, and accused them of targeting vulnerable seniors for profit. Jacob's inbox exploded. So did his voicemail. So did his partners. By Friday morning, he was in a conference room with 2 investors and a brand consultant who looked like she'd swallowed battery acid. "We're pulling out," one of the men said flatly. "You didn't disclose the public optics risk on this acquisition." Jacob leaned forward. "It's my mother's property, not the firm's. It has nothing to do with company assets." The other man shook his head. "It is the company. You are the company. And right now your last name equals scandal. No one wants to be the firm that sued a war widow over her dead husband's house." Jacob clenched his jaw. "She's not a war widow. She's a—" The room fell still. They were all watching him now. No one finished the sentence. The meeting ended 7 minutes later. Jacob's keycard to the upper floor stopped working that afternoon. Rachel came home that night with 2 takeout bags and a wine bottle already open. She dropped everything on the kitchen counter and sighed like a door slamming shut. "So we're officially the villains of the week," she muttered. Jacob didn't look up from the dining table where he was staring at a single sheet of paper, the landmark petition form that Martha had signed 3 days ago. Rachel walked over, poured herself a full glass, and leaned against the table. My assistant got calls asking if I condone elder exploitation. My boss asked if my husband needs psychological evaluation. It's a joke now, Jake. Your mom made you a meme. Jacob said nothing. She took a long drink. Do you know what this is doing to my reputation? She's 76, Rach, he said finally. She should be in a facility, not a courtroom. Shouldn't you have thought about that before the whole city started calling her Joan of Arc? Silence. I'm being serious, she snapped. Do you realize how insane this looks? She's playing the veteran widow card and it's working. No one gives a damn what we want now. He stood suddenly, the chair scraping violently across the floor. I gave her everything he said, voice shaking. I paid for the plumbing, for her prescriptions, for her goddamn cable. All she had to do was move. Rachel raised her glass. And instead she burned your career to the ground. She sipped. Maybe you should have seen this coming. He looked at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, she said maybe if you hadn't spent 10 years treating her like a liability, she wouldn't have treated you like one back. He stared at her, then quietly asked, Are you done? She picked up her bag. Not yet, but soon. Back in her house, Martha sat in front of the wooden box, breathing slowly, deliberately. The phone rang again. This time she answered. Miss Green, a voice said. This is Officer Reynolds with the 78th Precinct. You came in last year about an incident involving your son. Yes, she said. I believe at the time you declined to file an official report. I did. The officer paused. And have things escalated. She looked at the voicemail still sitting unread. The legal notices arriving without stamps. The developer representatives knocking on her door like sharks in tailored suits. Yes, she said. I'd like to make a formal report. She went down to the station 2 hours later, letter and deed in hand. She brought Elena with her not for protection, but for truth. She described the pressure, the threats, the subtle manipulations that blurred into commands. The nights Jacob arrived with a smile and left with ultimatums. The time he froze her bank card for her safety. The contract he slid in front of her disguised as a retirement agreement. The officer took it all down. When it was done, he said, We're going to refer this for review. Financial and emotional abuse of elders is now taken seriously in this city. I don't want him arrested, she said. I want him stopped. He nodded. Sometimes those are the same thing. That same night, Martha received a letter slid under her door. It was embossed with gold ink, crisp and formal. The return address, New York Heritage Conservancy Legal Division. Inside, a notarized letter offering full legal representation from their senior advocacy attorney pro bono in coordination with the state's Preservation Commission. They were standing with her. She read the letter twice, then a third time, and for the first time in weeks she let herself cry, not from fear, not from anger, but from the strange unfamiliar feeling of being backed, being protected. The walls of the house seemed to exhale around her. She stood slowly and touched the edge of the mantel. I'm not alone anymore, she whispered. The house, of course, said nothing, but it listened, and it held her words. The court order arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, carried by a courier in a windbreaker and a blank expression. Martha opened the envelope, slowly sitting at the kitchen table, where so much of her life had either begun or ended. The document was brief but powerful. Temporary injunction issued. All actions related to the transfer, sale, or redevelopment of property at 491 Prospect Avenue shall be legally suspended pending review. She read it twice, then once more aloud to the quiet of the house. The law had finally said it. Leave her house alone. She exhaled, her fingers trembling over the paper like she might burn it with touch alone. Not from fear, but from a stunned sort of relief. For once something had held the line with her. That night the wind came in stronger than usual, howling across the edges of Brooklyn like it was trying to unhinge the borough from its foundations. Martha moved through the house, turning off lamps, locking windows, double-checking the bolt on the front door. The familiar ritual comforted her. It gave shape to the silence. She left one light on in the hallway, just a little glow near the stairs. The wooden box had been moved back to the living room shelf just beneath the photo of Michael in uniform, as if they belonged together. At 11:47 p.m. the hallway light flickered once. At 11:49 she heard it, the backlatch. Not the front door. The backlatch. She froze. The old screen door creaked the way it always had, but now it was a threat, not a memory. Martha reached for the small flashlight she kept in the drawer and moved toward the kitchen, her slippers barely whispering against the floor. The basement door was ajar. She knew she'd locked it. A breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward and gripped the railing. From the base of the stairs came the faint sound of something dragging, a soft thud, then the distinct metallic clink of the box's latch. She didn't need to guess. It was Jacob. She descended the stairs one at a time, the flashlight beam trembling in her grasp. When she reached the bottom, her breath caught. Jacob was crouched near the workbench, the wooden box in his lap, one hand gripping a small crowbar. The box was already scratched at the edges, one corner splintered from impact. He turned when he heard her. Their eyes met. "What are you doing?" Her voice was low, stunned. He stood slowly, breathing hard like he'd just run a mile. "Fixing this," he snapped, "before it kills everything." She moved toward him. "Put it down." "You don't get it, do you?" he said, voice rising. "This box, this house, this whole performance, it's tearing everything apart. You're turning our lives into some kind of sob story for people who'll forget your name in a week." Martha stared at him. "That box is history." "It's obstruction," he shouted. "It's the past holding us hostage." She stepped forward, trembling but steady. "You came here to destroy it." "I came here," Jacob hissed, "to end this delusion before it swallows us both." He held up the crowbar like a gavel poised above the cracked lid. "Don't," Martha said, voice shaking. "You care more about dead men than your living son," Jacob spat. "You're not living," she whispered. "You're consuming." He stepped closer. "I'm trying to survive." She didn't move. "This house," he said, shaking, "was supposed to mean freedom, options, futures. And you're turning it into a shrine for ghosts. Why do you always choose the past over me?" Her voice cracked but didn't break. "Because the past never tried to erase me." Silence. Jacob's grip on the crowbar tightened, his jaw clenched. "I sacrificed everything for you," he said through his teeth. "You sacrificed me for a business plan," she replied, eyes steady. "You stopped seeing me the moment I stopped being useful." Jacob's face twisted. "All you do is hoard. You hoard pain, regret, old dresses and yellow paper and stories that never belonged to anyone but Dad." Martha stepped forward again. Her voice dropped to a whisper that cut deeper than a scream. "Because memory," she said, "is the only thing that can't be stolen. The only thing I have that you haven't twisted into leverage." He flinched. "You can't understand that," she continued, "because everything you touch has to turn into profit. But some things were built to endure, not to sell." Jacob looked at the box, then at her, then back at the box. And for a moment, just one, his eyes flickered. Something young and hollow and scared swam to the surface, but it vanished just as quickly. He dropped the crowbar to the floor with a metallic thud. "I hope this makes you happy," he muttered. And then he turned, shoved past her, and stormed up the stairs. The door slammed behind him, and she was alone again. She dropped to her knees in the cold basement, breath ragged. The box was cracked along the top edge, the clasp partially broken. She gathered the pieces, Walter's letter, the deed, the wedding photo, and placed them back inside one by one, like bandaging a wound. Then she hugged the box to her chest and rocked slightly, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the kind of ache that only comes from confronting what love becomes when it's twisted too long. She whispered to the wood, "I'm still here." No reply, but the quiet wrapped around her like arms that didn't let go. The sun came up slow, unsure, like it wasn't quite ready to shine on what had happened the night before. Martha didn't sleep. She sat in the basement until the light changed, until the shadows along the stone walls softened into day. The wooden box was in her lap, damaged, but intact. Its edges frayed, the lid slightly crooked now. She had run her hands over it for hours, as if her fingers could will it back to wholeness. At 7:16 a.m. there was a knock at the door. She startled, not the sharp knock of Jacob, not the soft, polite kind either. This was deliberate, firm, a rhythm that carried something old. She climbed the stairs with effort. Her knees ached. Her shoulders felt like they were still carrying the confrontation from the night before. But she moved, because that's what women like her had done all their lives, moved even when everything inside them begged to sit still. When she opened the door, 3 men stood on her porch. Not young men. These were men with backs slightly bent, hands rough from a different time. One wore a bomber jacket. Another had a cane made from oak. The third held his cap in his hands like it was a flag. "Ma'am," the man with the cane said. "Are you Martha Green?" She nodded slowly. "We served with your husband," he said. "Korea, 3rd Battalion Baker Company." Her hand went to the edge of the doorway, clutching it. The man in the bomber jacket stepped forward, his voice cracked like gravel. "I'm Sergeant Lyle Benton. This here is Everett Cho, and this," he gestured to the youngest looking of the three, "is Robert Griggs. He was just a medic back then." Martha tried to speak. Her voice caught. "We saw the broadcast," Everett said. "Didn't expect to, but there it was, your face. That photo, that name, Walter Greaves." Martha's eyes filled. She opened the door wider. "Please," she whispered, "come in." They sat around the kitchen table like ghosts, revisiting a battlefield. The box sat between them, still open, still vulnerable. The men didn't touch it. They looked at it the way soldiers look at headstones. Lyle cleared his throat. "Walter didn't have any family," he said. "But if he did, I figure you were it. That letter, that was him, right down to the careful damn punctuation. He was the kind of guy who polished his boots in the rain." Martha gave a soft, broken laugh. Robert the medic leaned forward. "You never heard the whole story, did you?" She shook her head. "Your husband probably didn't want you to," he said. "He carried it different, heavy, like it wasn't his to tell." Everett put both hands on the table. "It was 1952, last days of the hill battles near Chorwan. You remember hearing about that?" Martha nodded slowly. "Michael wrote once, said it was hell with snow." Everett's jaw clenched. "That's about right," Lyle continued. "The Chinese had artillery all over the ridge. We were pinned. 2 squads cut off. Mike's unit took a direct hit. He was bleeding bad, unconscious. We were told to pull back." Robert looked down, but Walter wouldn't leave. He carried Michael, Lyle said, over his shoulder, through the smoke, through fire, took a round in the hip and still kept moving. "He put your husband down behind a broken tank tread," Everett added, "went back for another man." "He didn't make it back," Robert finished. Silence fell. Martha's hands were shaking. Everett reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the table and unwrapped it slowly. It was a patch, old, faded. "The insignia of Baker Company 3rd Battalion. We kept it," he said. "After the war, we always wondered what happened to Michael. Then the footage aired, that box, that name, and we knew." Martha touched the patch like it was a wound. "He died so Michael could come home," she whispered. "No," Lyle said, voice firm. "He died so you both could come home. Walter knew what this house meant. He told us about it every night, about the ring he picked out, about how you sewed through rations. He used to say, 'If I go down, I'm going down knowing she'll live on a porch with hydrangeas and a quiet kitchen.'" Tears streamed down Martha's face, unashamed and steady. She didn't try to wipe them. They belonged there. The men left just before noon, the promise of coffee for a future visit lingering between them. Martha stood on the porch long after they'd gone, watching the block as if it had become a stage. She wasn't alone in this story. She never had been. The wind picked up, and across the street a woman snapped a photo not of Martha but of the house. That evening her inbox flooded again, this time from reporters, then from editors. Then somewhere around 8:47 p.m. a blue checkmark DM slid into Elena's account from a senior producer at the BBC. By Friday morning, The Guardian, Le Monde, and Al Jazeera English were calling the Channel 12 switchboard, asking for rights to rebroadcast The House That Remembers. The hashtags didn't stop trending. Legacy, not liability, #Brooklyn Memory House, #Walter Greaves. College students wrote essays about Martha. Veterans posted tributes to Walter. Sociologists cited the story in discussions on memory, aging, and place. The world didn't just hear her story. It picked it up and carried it like a torch. 3 days later, a formal letter arrived from the Smithsonian Institution. The envelope was thick, watermarked, the seal pressed into real paper, not just printed pixels. Martha sat on the couch, turning it over in her hands 3 times before opening it. The letter was addressed to Mrs. Martha Green, signed by the Director of National Memory Projects. It began with words she'd never imagined anyone writing to her. "We are moved, humbled, and inspired by your courage and your stewardship of a story that bridges generations." And then, "It is with great respect that we formally request the opportunity to preserve your memory box as a central artifact in our upcoming exhibition, Letters Home, War Family and the Legacy of Memory." They wanted Walter's letter, Michael's photo, the deed, not because they were valuable, but because they mattered. Martha pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. For decades she had carried the weight of silence, of being forgotten in a house the world passed by. Now that very house, its cracks, its secrets, its love, was being stitched into the fabric of national memory. She looked across the room at the box. Its lid was still crooked, its edge still splintered, but inside everything had come alive again. The subpoena came wrapped in a manila envelope, and a silence Jacob hadn't prepared for. He stood on the front steps of the building where he now rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Clinton Hill. Nothing like the sleek penthouse he'd been eyeing just 3 months before, and stared at the official seal pressed on the front of the document. Office of the District Attorney, Elder Protection Division. A neighbor passed by with a stroller and gave him a cautious look. Word traveled fast these days. In Brooklyn, faster than the L train during a storm delay. Jacob opened the envelope with stiff fingers. Notice of formal investigation, allegations of psychological coercion, undue influence, and attempted financial exploitation of a dependent elder. He let the words wash over him like freezing water. There was a second envelope too, this one thinner, neater, scented faintly of perfume. From Rachel. He knew before he opened it what it would say. The paper was white, the ink was blue. Petition for divorce. He didn't read the rest. He just stood there on the steps holding both envelopes like the scales of his own judgment. The headlines had shifted tone. The public no longer saw him as the ambitious son. Now he was the man who tried to bulldoze a widow's memory for a few square feet of concrete. And worst of all, he didn't even disagree. He looked up at the sky. Brooklyn gray, that soft, harsh color between regret and revelation, and wondered how long it would take before he stopped hearing his mother's voice in his head. You can't understand, because everything you touch has to turn into profit. 3 blocks away at 491 Prospect Avenue, the scaffold went up. Martha sat on the porch, wrapped in her late husband's army jacket, watching as 2 preservationists carefully measured the curvature of the cornice above the bay window. They worked with reverence like surgeons, every scrape and tap done with whispered intent. A new sign had been mounted on the wrought iron fence just yesterday. Historic Preservation Site. Martha Green, Homestead 1954, Veteran's Legacy, Landmark. She didn't cry when they installed it. She just stared at the letters like she was reading her own name for the first time. Kids on scooters passed by and pointed at the plaque. A woman took a selfie with it. A man tipped his hat to her from the sidewalk. "Morning, Miss Green," he said. "Brooklyn's proud of you." She smiled back gently. "Thank you." Inside, the scent of plaster dust and old oak filled the hallway. The preservation team had removed layers of paint to reveal the original wainscoting. In the parlor, they'd found a hand-carved panel that had been covered for decades, an ornate pattern. Walter had likely chosen a curl of leaves and compass points, framing the initials WG. Martha ran her hand along the ridges, letting the wood speak to her fingertips. The house was waking up, and so was she. That afternoon she went into the bedroom with a purpose she hadn't felt since the day she found the box. The wedding dress still hung near the window where it swayed slightly in the summer breeze. It looked different now, less like a relic, more like a choice. She sat at the vanity, pulled out her sewing basket, and threaded a new needle with pale ivory silk. The thread glowed in the light like it had waited all these years for this moment. She worked slowly. Every stitch was measured, not rushed, not frantic, just deliberate. At one point she pricked her finger and a tiny dot of blood appeared. She stared at it, then smiled. Still alive, she thought. By early evening it was done. The hem had been repaired, the neckline restructured, the missing pearl replaced with one from a bracelet Michael had given her in 1967. She'd broken it during an argument and kept the pieces anyway. Now the pearl lived again right where her heartbeat would press against it. Martha stood up. She stepped carefully into the dress, pulling it up over her hips, arms through the sleeves, hands behind her back. Her reflection met her in the mirror. Not young, not untouched, but whole. Her silver hair framed her face like it was meant to. The dress didn't erase the years it honored them. She reached for a single pin and fastened a silk flower just above her chest. Then she stepped back and smiled. It wasn't the smile of a woman trying to look beautiful. It was the smile of someone who finally saw herself. "I was always more than someone's mother," she whispered. "I just forgot." Outside, the neighbors had begun calling it the Martha House. Children whispered stories of the box like it was a treasure from another realm. High school teachers assigned essays on memory and home. A man from the local library stopped by and asked if she'd be open to a community oral history night. She said yes. People sat on folding chairs on her lawn and listened to her read Walter's letter under the porch light. When she finished, no one applauded. They just sat with her in the silence. And somehow that was louder. One night, as the last rays of sun slipped behind the skyline, she stood again in front of the mirror, still wearing the dress, her hand resting on the carved edge of the dresser. She remembered being 22. She remembered fear. She remembered the train station kiss goodbye, and the years of waiting, and the cold letter that said Michael wasn't coming home the same man. She remembered how she'd told herself to stay small, to not make waves, to not inconvenience anyone. And now, as twilight dusted the corners of the room in gold, she realized no one had ever truly seen her before. Not like this. Not like now. She touched the mirror. "I'm not valuable because someone needs me," she said. "I'm valuable because I remember." The room did not answer, but the dress fit perfectly, and that was enough. The air on 491 Prospect Avenue buzzed with quiet electricity. Cables ran along the sidewalk. Light rigs glowed softly against the face of the old brownstone. Folding chairs lined the front lawn, now perfectly trimmed and framed with small white lanterns. A modest stage had been assembled where the front steps met the porch. Nothing grand, nothing polished, just real. It was the kind of summer evening that held its breath. Producers from Channel 12 moved briskly, testing mics, checking camera angles, adjusting brightness against the softening sky. Elena wore black jeans and a dark blouse, a headset in one ear, and a clipboard in her hand. But her face, despite the technical buzz, carried something reverent. Because tonight wasn't just a broadcast. It was testimony. The house behind her had become more than architecture. It had become memory incarnate, and its keeper, Martha Green, was about to speak. Backstage in what used to be the foyer, Martha stood in front of the hallway mirror. The wedding dress had been pressed that morning by a neighbor who insisted on using the same iron she used on her own grandmother's veil. The lace looked soft but firm, holding every stitch Martha had laid by hand. The dress did not erase her age, it honored it. The box rested beside her on the side table, cleaned, polished, but still visibly cracked from the night Jacob tried to break it. She hadn't repaired the split. Some things were meant to stay visible. Martha ran her hand gently over the lid, then picked it up. It wasn't heavy. It had never been heavy. The weight had only ever lived in silence. Elena appeared in the doorway, earpiece still blinking. "You ready?" she asked. Martha looked at herself one last time. I think she said softly, "I always was." The audience was quiet. Not the restless kind of quiet, but the sacred kind, when people know they're about to witness something that doesn't happen twice. Elena walked up to the mic. The cameras rolled. A red light blinked above the tripod. Phones came out slowly, hesitantly, as if people were asking for permission to remember. "Good evening, Brooklyn," Elena said, her voice calm and firm. "Tonight we gather not just to celebrate a house or a story, but a woman, a living witness to a time most of us only know through headlines and textbooks." She gestured to the brownstone behind her, lit golden by the early evening sun. This home was built on sacrifice, on memory, on promises made in trenches and carried across oceans. It stood quietly while the world forgot it, and it would have stayed that way until someone stood up and said no more. She turned toward the open front door. "Please welcome Miss Martha Green, seamstress, war widow, and witness to a forgotten America." Martha stepped out slowly, her hand around the wooden box. The dress shimmered in the low light. The audience rose to their feet, not in applause, in silence. Not one person clapped. They stood like soldiers, saluting like churches, rising to hymns like children watching history pass by. Martha moved slowly toward the microphone. The box stayed cradled against her ribs like it belonged to her chest. When she reached the podium, she didn't speak right away. She looked out over the sea of faces, young, old, curious, reverent. She saw tears already, not from sorrow, but from recognition. And somewhere in a corner apartment downtown, a flat-screen TV flickered quietly on a glass table. Jacob sat on the edge of his bed, suit jacket still on, watching with red eyes. The courtroom subpoena lay unopened beside him. The divorce filing on the floor. His mother stood center stage stronger than he'd ever seen her. She adjusted the mic and began. I was born in 1947, she said. My father was a shoemaker. My mother baked bread every morning and never smiled with her teeth. I learned to sew when I was 7 because my school uniform ripped and we couldn't afford another one. Her voice was steady. I met Michael Green when I was 19. He had the quietest laugh of any boy I'd ever met. He signed up for Korea 3 months after proposing. We were married in a borrowed dress with 10 people in the backyard and a cake from the neighbor's pantry. She paused. He came back changed, a little more quiet, a little more hollow, but he never let go of the promise he made to Walter Greaves. She raised the box. This house. The crowd leaned in. This house wasn't a gift. It was a legacy, paid for in sacrifice, in blood. Walter didn't have children, didn't have a wife. What he had was memory. What he gave us was place. She opened the box gently. These are the things he left me. Letters, a deed, a wedding photo, my husband's journal. They don't shine. They don't make noise, but they carry something heavier than money. She looked out across the crowd again. For years I thought my only value was in what I could provide to others. As a mother, as a wife, as a woman willing to shrink so others could grow. The wind stirred slightly, but this box reminded me that what I remember, what I carry, is just as valuable as what I give. She turned to the children in the front row. Don't let them tell you the past doesn't matter. She turned to the adults in the back. Don't sell what your grandparents bled to keep. Then she looked straight into the lens of the live camera. To anyone watching who thinks they're too small to matter, too old to speak, too invisible to be heard, I'm telling you now your story isn't over, and it never was. The crowd stood still. Then slowly someone placed their hand on their heart. Another followed, then another, until half the audience stood in quiet tribute not to the house, but to the woman who refused to leave it. Martha closed the lid on the box and smiled, not the small, polite smile of survival, but the full, deep, earned smile of someone who had finally returned to herself. In the apartment, Jacob leaned forward, elbow on knee, watching her through the screen. His throat tightened, his chest ached, and for a single staggering moment, he saw her, really saw her, not as an obstacle, not as a weight, but as the beginning of everything he'd once claimed to want, and it broke him. Outside, as the broadcast ended and the sun dipped below the city's silhouette, people stayed seated. No one rushed. No one scrolled their phones. They just sat, listening, because sometimes even silence carries an echo. The cameras were still rolling. The applause had faded to a hush. Martha remained at the microphone, the box still cradled gently in her hands. She glanced toward Elena, who gave her the slightest nod. And so Martha stepped forward again, no script, no teleprompter, just memory. Just truth. I've spent most of my life in rooms where I didn't speak, she said, her voice slow, deliberate. Rooms where I was expected to listen, to nod, to disappear behind casseroles and clean laundry and the needs of everyone else. A light breeze moved across the crowd. I raised a child, buried a husband, stitched hundreds of wedding gowns for brides who never remembered my name. And every time I asked for something, I was told I was too much or too late, or that I was a burden. She looked up at the faces staring back. I believed them. Her hands tightened slightly around the wooden box. After Michael died, I stopped talking about the war, about Walter, about what this house meant, because no one wanted to hear about sacrifice that didn't fit neatly into a headline. No one wanted to hear about the quiet women who waited, who cooked with ration cards, who lived in homes built from grief. Someone sniffled in the third row. Martha's voice remained steady, clear. I kept the silence because I thought I had no right to make noise. She ran her thumb across the cracked edge of the box. But silence doesn't preserve memory. She looked directly into the camera. It buries it. A long pause followed. Then she lifted the box slightly, holding it not above her head, but just enough so the entire crowd could see it. This is not just a collection of old papers, she said. This is my proof that I existed, that I loved, that I mattered. That something was given to me not because I asked, but because I was seen. Her eyes gleamed now, but not from tears, from light. I am not a burden, she said. I am a witness. The silence afterward was total, as if Brooklyn itself stopped breathing. Then, like a spark catching in dry brush, someone in the back stood and clapped. One clap, then two, then a wave. The entire lawn rose. Applause thundered, not polite, not obligatory, but visceral, raw. People didn't just clap. They rose to their feet like a verdict had been delivered. Some cried, some just nodded heads to their chests. On the far edge of the crowd, a young woman in a military uniform saluted quietly. Elena stepped forward with a small podium table beside her, and Martha turned. A velvet cloth was laid out. The Smithsonian curator, an older black woman in a navy pantsuit, stepped beside her with reverent hands. Martha looked down at the box one last time. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled deeply, then placed it on the cloth. The curator covered it gently as if tucking in a child for sleep. A document was signed. A flashbulb popped. The box. Walter's promise. Michael's hope. Martha's proof would live forever under glass, beneath the dome of a national museum. But not as an artifact, as a voice. That night the house was still. The guests had left. The equipment had been packed away. The echo of applause still lived in the wood. Martha stood in the hallway barefoot, holding a cup of tea that had long since cooled. She wore her cardigan again. The dress had been folded neatly and placed back in her cedar chest. But she didn't feel smaller without it. She felt whole. She stepped into the living room and opened the window just slightly. The evening air slipped in, carrying the scent of earth-old bricks and something faintly citrus. She walked slowly to her favorite chair by the window, sat down, placed the teacup on the sill, and watched. Outside, the streetlight flickered. Children rode past on bicycles. A couple walked hand in hand, pausing to glance at the plaque by the gate. They didn't see her, but she saw them, and that she thought was enough. The curtain fluttered softly beside her. Her hand rested on the arm of the chair, palm open, not reaching, just being. And her eyes were calm, not wistful, not waiting, but quiet, at peace, like someone who had finally finished the long letter she never thought she'd send. The sun dipped below the rooftops, casting golden stripes across the floorboards. The air was warm, but the light had that specific softness that only came at the end of something earned. Martha tilted her head back against the cushion and closed her eyes. She didn't speak, didn't smile, just breathed. And in that still frame, just before the camera faded, her whole life whispered across the screen. The picture cut to black. A single line appeared in white simple text across the silence. Memory cannot be sold. It lives by being told.